Hello, and welcome to another Mechanics Guide. After saving the first Haven, I think it's a good time to talk about our heroes, what makes them tick, what all their stats do, and what to think about when our heroes level up. There are a lot of stats, 12 primary and 18 secondary stats. This is a lot of information to take in if you're just beginning the game. So I'm going to go over all of them and give some advice and general considerations on what you might want to focus on, and the use and usefulness of each stat. We're going to start with the primary stats, as they are the simplest. Health is pretty obvious. Don't let this go to 0, or you die. But also be aware that losing enough HP will cause a wounded state, which produces hero movement and action points. Generally, I don't pick this as a level up, as there are other ways to boost your HP, such as from the temple or on gear. Some perks like Bodybuilder synergize well with large health pools, and this may change how you feel about it when you're selecting it for a level up. Mana is likewise self-explanatory. This is your fuel for special and usually high impact abilities. Spend it to cause a lot of damage, or maybe hoard it for passive buffs from perks like Fueled by Mana. This is not something I usually pick when leveling up, largely due to my tendency to only spend as much mana as I regen every night, so having a larger pool of mana doesn't matter very much if I'm only spending the smaller amount I will regen. This is of course a personal tendency due to my giant robotic crab syndrome, and your playstyle may differ greatly. Mana can also be increased from other sources, such as the Mana Well, or perks such as Magic Growth or Runic Gift. AP, or action points, limit how much you can do in a single turn. Weapons have different attacks, all costing 1 or 2 AP. Armors and accessories can grant access to additional abilities that may cost AP as well. More AP is always better, and generally speaking, AP is the most valuable stat. This is an automatic pick if offered at level up. Moves the number of tiles a hero can travel per turn, and more is always better. Some heroes will need more than others though, such as melee fighters tend to need more, while heroes with long-range bows or spells are often just fine with less movement per turn. It's worth knowing that there is a cap at 17 movement. When leveling up, movement is a case-by-case basis. Sometimes it's vital, and sometimes I'll sit around and wait in the hopes of an uncommon or rare level up to get 2 or 3 movement points instead of just 1. Damage is a simple multiplier for damage dealt by the hero. It is the most basic and always applicable stat for increasing damage, and as such, its value increases by the least amount per level up. At 5% for a common level up, this sets the baseline for the minimum acceptable value of a level up for me when I'm picking for a level up. It is the simplest and easiest stat to get value out of, and it is good to have some points in here, but it's not the one and only stat for offense that a new player might think it is. Critical chance is exactly what it sounds like. The chance that any given hit will be a critical hit. Crits multiply the damage dealt by the value of the critical power secondary stat, which starts at 150%. So at default value, a crit does 50% more damage than a normal hit. The crit stat has a lot of considerations in my opinion. First off is that low amounts of it are pretty underwhelming, but high amounts of it can be very powerful. It's worth pointing out that crit chance caps at 100%, so you can absolutely make a hero that crits with every hit, and that is very, very powerful. The second big consideration is that crit chance's value scales with crit power. While having 100% crit chance and doing 50% more damage per hit is super nice, having a higher crit power can dramatically increase the damage dealt per hit. One nice thing about making a crit build is that crit chance is a primary stat, and crit power is a secondary stat, meaning you have more opportunities to increase both values and you never have to pick one over the other. Lastly, there are many strong perks that rely on critical hits to activate their power, and a hero with one or many of these perks available may want to invest more heavily into crit chance than one without. Resistance reduction is a flat reduction to the enemy's resistance. Some enemies have high resistance, and this stat may be needed to deal appreciable damage to those enemy types. As the tooltip says, this cannot decrease an enemy's resistance below 0. So an excess of resistance reduction is a waste. For this reason, I usually only take 1 or 2 level ups worth of resistance reduction. Enough that if a regular clawer picks up some resistance, I'm not losing out on damage potential, but generally not enough to overcome the high resistance enemies like Kindled. This is always open to personal preference, but when you can get around high resistance in other ways, I don't feel it's worth the opportunity cost of taking resistance reduction over other primary stats. Accuracy mitigates enemy dodge chance. The value of this stat is going to vary from enemy to enemy, and will be of much more value to a hero using a ranged weapon for the reasons I mentioned in the previous mechanics video. Much like resistance reduction, I feel like this is a good stat to have only 1 or 2 level ups in, and for the same reasons. Surplus accuracy doesn't benefit you in any way, and high dodge enemies can be countered in other ways, such as with perks or debuffs or attacks that have the undodgeable effect. Still, I always make sure to have enough accuracy to have 100% hit chances on normal enemies. Archers are a different matter though. If a hero is planning on having a ranged weapon as their primary weapon, then more accuracy is needed. I'd say maybe double what I put on fighters or mages. Because long-range shots can double a target's dodge before accuracy is applied, having a surplus of accuracy won't often be a waste for archers. Again, this can be a matter of personal feeling. If you are missing attacks and are frustrated by wasted AP, then invest in more in accuracy. But if you're still hitting 100% of your shots, you don't need more accuracy. Block is our first defensive trait, and it's flat damage mitigation from incoming attacks. This stat can really minimize incoming damage and keep heroes safe. Importantly, block is applied after resistance, making it more valuable than it might seem at first glance. Despite its value, block is something I almost never pick on a level up. But there are other ways to stay safe, and unless I'm purposely building a tank with spiky counter or for some other reason, there are better choices to pick when leveling up. Armor acts as a shield before damage may be applied to a hero's health. The best thing about armor is that it refreshes every turn, letting you take some amount of damage every turn without it turning into chip damage that will eventually wear you down. While the armor stat is great, I wouldn't pick it while leveling up for the same reasons as block. You can get armor from gear, and unless I'm making a tank hero, there are usually other better ways of staying safe. Every hero should have some armor at all times just to stay safe, but spending a level up pick on it is usually a waste. Resistance is a percentage reduction to all incoming damage, potentially making it a very powerful survival stat. It even caps out at 100%, requiring clawers to have resistance reduction or magical damage to even hurt a hero with 100% resistance. As great as that sounds, it's not very plausible to get that much resistance. It's still valuable though, and when combined with the block stat, any incoming attack loses a percentage chunk of its damage and then further loses a fixed amount. A moderate amount of resistance stat with some block behind it can make a very tanky hero. However, it is again not a stat I choose very often, as resistance can be found in armor, and there are generally other stats I would pick ahead of resistance unless I am specifically making a tank build. Dodge is a percent chance to completely avoid an attack. It is reduced by enemy accuracy and caps at 95%, so there's no guarantee of dodging an attack. Dodge is another stat that can be found commonly in armor and equipment. Having high dodge is nice, and there are some elf perks that really lean into dodging. But dodging will always be a chance, not a fixed outcome. It's nice to have, but I would never pick it when leveling up, unless specifically building for an elf dodge tank. That does it for the primary stats. These are the 12 things you get to pick from during the first selection when leveling up. I believe some of the stats are weighted to be rarer than the others, but the only one I can be absolutely sure that is true for is action points. My general priorities for what to pick would be action points every time it's offered, followed by getting movement to an acceptable level, which varies from hero to hero, and then making sure accuracy and resistance reduction are satisfactory, and then damage or crit chance. I almost never pick health, mana, or the defensive stats unless I'm making a specific kind of build, or if a hero has a real shortcoming in one of these stats due to negative traits or something else. Of course, you don't always get offered the stat you may be looking for, so you will have to adjust as you go. Now it's time to cover the secondary stats. Starting with mana and health regen, these are exactly what you think they are, and will replenish your health or mana by the listed amount every morning. Personally, I never pick health regen because I should never be taking damage, and mana regen offers such minor amounts per level up that I think it's outclassed by picking any other secondary stat that adds damage. Reliability is an interesting stat. It increases the minimum damage that a weapon will do. At 100% reliability, a weapon will always deal maximum damage. And this sounds pretty great in theory, but most weapons don't have such a large damage spread that picking reliability is going to do more damage than picking any other stat that also increases damage. There are only a couple of weapons that have attacks with such a large min to max damage spread that I would ever consider this stat meaningful for. F tier stat, garbage, would not pick unless I'd re-rolled myself into a corner, and my choices are reliability versus situational stats that a hero isn't using, like stun, poison, or propagate. The 3 damage types have their own secondary stat, which will of course directly add to the damage output of a given damage type. These stats will offer a larger increase per pick than the primary damage stat, but they only apply to one of the 3 damage types. If you stick to one type per hero, this is easy extra damage. If you mix weapon types, you will only be getting value from this when you're using the correct weapon type. Personal preference and how the hero is equipped will determine exactly how valuable these stats are for a given hero, but they're generally a solid pick. Critical power goes hand in hand with crit chance, as I talked about before. If you have a lot of crit chance, then this stat is gold. If you have 0 crit chance, then this stat is worthless. Its value on level up is entirely dependent on crit chance, how much you're willing to invest into a crit build, and if you have more level ups in the future to get even more crit and crit power. Situational, but strong if you build for it. Opportunism applies a damage multiplier whenever an attack hits a target with a negative status effect on it, such as debuffs, stun, poison, and contagion. At the start of a Haven, this stat may not look very good, but it usually won't take long into a run until your heroes are able to put something on a given target to activate Opportunism, and thus Opportunism turns into free extra damage. Perks such as Mark or Contagion offer action point free ways to apply a status effect every turn to make sure you can get your Opportunism bonus damage. A+ stat, good pick, always have at least some Opportunism on every hero. If you have a hero that already has an easy way to debuff an enemy by perk or weapon, then slam as much Opportunism into them as you can. Isolation offers bonus damage for hitting targets with no adjacent ally. It's important to know that this means orthogonal tiles only. Diagonal tiles do not count for isolation. Like Opportunism, it's fairly easy, but not always a 100% applicable stat to get value out of. While the regular clawers are often packed shoulder to shoulder, it's the bigger enemies where I would say isolation benefits the player the most. It's usually not too difficult to clear the fodder away from a high threat monster and then reap the benefits of isolation damage, letting you take down a dangerous threat much faster than otherwise. Like Opportunism, I would put at least some isolation on every hero. A- stat, generally speaking, A+ stat if you use a weapon that multiplies your isolation stat, such as the dagger or longbow. Experience gain is self-evident, and the only thing I think that needs to be said about it is that it is obviously best when taken early. If offered experience gain in the first couple of nights of a Haven, it's a strong pick, especially if you're in one of the Havens that lasts longer than others. If offered around the midpoint, then it's questionable, probably having to consider what other choices it's up against. And if it's offered late in a run, it's almost guaranteed to be a pass, not enough time for it to offer value over other picks. A- skill when taken early in a Haven, and it drops off in value with every night that passes. Healing received simply multiplies the value of any health gained from any source. Potions will heal more per sip, temples will heal more per activation, and so on. Generally not useful, as it's best to avoid taking damage altogether. There are a few rare cases where it might be useful though, mostly blood magic builds where you convert mana into HP and then use your HP as if it was your mana. F tier, would not pick unless under very specific builds. Skill range will add range to any skills that can have their range modified. Naturally, this is just about every ranged and spell attack there is, but there are a surprising number of melee weapons that can have their attacks benefit from this stat as well. All around a good general purpose stat. B tier stat. Very useful, but not critical. It can sometimes be very, very funny if you have the right weapons and a lot of points in this stat. Poison damage is a percentage increase to any poison damage you deal. Naturally, this is very situational. If you don't have a weapon or a perk that deals poison damage, then this is totally useless. If you do have a poison attack, then ramping up the damage you deal with poison can be vital. Doing enough poison damage to kill an enemy in 2 turns rather than 3 is a huge deal, or 1 turn instead of 2 for low HP foes like Kindled. If you start investing in the poison stat, you sort of lock yourself into the continued use of the weapon that deals poison damage, or else you're wasting these skill picks if you replace your kit and don't deal poison damage anymore. Situational stat can be very strong. Stun chance is the same as poison, in that you need a means to stun anything to get any value out of it. Stunning can be very strong. Beyond just stunning a clawer so it can't reach you during its turn, stunning a group of clawers can cause a traffic jam, as clawers behind the stun ones can't move through the spaces the stun ones occupy, which buys you even more time. I find stun a little less valuable than poison, because the bigger, more dangerous clawers typically have high stun resistance, while nothing has poison resistance. Situational at best, easy to live without. The multi-hit stat adds a flat number of attacks to any attack that deals multiple hits. There are only a few weapons that have multi-hits, but adding an additional hit to those attacks is very powerful. The hand crossbow's basic attack starts at 2 hits, and even a +1 to this stat means the hand crossbow's basic attack deals 50% more damage. An additional attack also means the ability to spread more hits to more targets to pick off critically weak enemies. Being able to finish off 3 or more weakened enemies for a single AP is great value. Absolute slam pick for any hero that's using a hand crossbow or other weapon that can make use of multi-hits. Completely avoidable otherwise. Propagation bounces add an additional bounce to any attack that propagates, meaning things like Chain Lightning will hit 1 additional target for every point in this stat. Very situational stat, but also very powerful for the right attacks. The Tomes of Magic, with Chain Lightning and Weakening Touch for example, get a lot of value out of this stat, as do some other weapons. Absolute slam dunk pick for certain weapons such as the Tome, Druid Staff, or Dwarf Gauntlet, and a complete pass otherwise. Propagation damage is a bit more complex, but the same situational conditions apply for when it's worth picking. Attacks like Chain Lightning that hit multiple targets lose damage each time they bounce from one target to another, and this stat is the amount of damage that is kept between bounces. Defaulting at 85% means that each time lightning bounces to a new target, 15% of that damage is lost per jump. That actually adds up pretty quickly. For a quick divergence into math, let's say that we have a Chain Lightning doing 200 damage, enough to kill any basic clawer in the first hit. The second clawer then takes 85% as much damage, 170 points, which is still enough to easily kill a basic clawer. The third clawer only takes 144 damage though, which might not be enough to secure a kill. The next is then 123, then 104, then 89. The damage drop-off becomes pretty apparent quickly at 85%. Boosting this stat will mean less damage is lost between bounces, and it caps at 100%, meaning no damage drop-off between bounces. There is a very large and visible difference between Chain Lightning with 85% propagation damage and 100% propagation damage. One of those is only guaranteed 2 or 3 kills, while the other one is guaranteeing as many kills as it has bounces. B+ skill if you're constantly throwing propagating attacks around. Chain Lightning every turn is a little bit expensive for my tastes, but the Druid Staff and Dwarf Gauntlet have cheaper options that make this a slam pick. Lastly, we have momentum. Some weapons will pick up a damage bonus per tile traveled in a turn, resetting whenever the bonus is used in an attack. Weapons that can make use of this bonus will have their own built-in momentum stat, so it's not necessary to have points in the stat to make use of them, but having a high momentum stat can really ramp up the damage these attacks do. The bonus is additive per tile, so traveling multiple tiles can really rack up bonus damage for one massive attack. It is perhaps a little less valuable when dealing with tightly packed clawers, only having to travel 1 or 2 tiles between attacks. But even then, a small amount of damage bonus can mean the difference between killing in 1 shot or in 2 shots. And that's all there is for the stats. I meant to cover perks in this video, but it turned out to be rather lengthy, so we'll cover perks in another video. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next Haven.